Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Utter Punts. We're not going to beat around the bush here because there's absolutely stacks to talk about, and the big breaking news that's come out today is that the Jets have sacked head coach Robert Saleh, and I'm not sure I saw it coming. Right, let's introduce you to the crowd, shall we? We've got Big Jim and we've got Ollie as well, talking us through all of the NFL this week. It seems like there is only one place to start, chaps. Who was surprised to see Saleh go and who wasn't?
Yeah, I was pretty surprised, to be fair. I mean, the Jets are not good offensively, but Salah's strength is on the defensive side of the ball. I think they're the seventh ranked defense from last year and seventh ranked so far this year. Ultimately, if there was a time to get rid of Salah, it was arguably at the end of last year. 5 games into this season doesn't make much sense to me, to be honest with you. I don't think he'll have much trouble picking up work as a defensive coordinator going forward because that Jets defense is pretty mean. But I was surprised. Yeah, I'll be honest. I was very, very surprised. I thought it just doesn't make any sense. It's got New York Jets written all over it. To be fair, lack of logic, poor timing. But you've got to suspect that Salah hasn't been running the show in New York. Let's be honest. It's the Aaron Rodgers. He's de facto GM, de facto head coach, de facto offensive coordinator. So if Rodgers has said time to go, it's time to go. Is pretty much my opinion on that. Ollie, I don't know what you think.
Um, I thought at the end of the season he'd probably get fired, or I personally am not a fan of his, so I would have fired him at the end of last season. Not because I know he's been dealt a tough hand at quarterback previous to Rodgers with Zach Wilson and stuff, but I never particularly enjoyed his coaching style of just moving it on and say let's wait till the future, let's see what happens. But the timing is bad, like Jim said, it's poor timing. You're 5 games into the season, you're 2-3. It's the first time the Jets owner has fired a head coach mid-season in 25 years, owning the franchise. So yeah, it was a surprise. I was at the game at Tottenham against the Vikings, which did end up being Salah's last game. And Jim was right. Defensively, they caused us problems, probably more than any other team this season. And we faced the Niners, we faced the Packers, we faced Houston. So, defensively, they were really good, which is his strength. But offensively, they were terrible. And it was Aaron Rodgers' probably worst game ever, maybe. 3 interceptions he threw, a pick six, 200 yards, but I think it was on 52 pass attempts. If anything, Nathaniel Hackett probably should have been the one fired, but obviously he's Rodgers' good buddy. But what I did see, which surprised me, is that Hackett isn't the interim head coach, because that's what I thought they'd do. But instead, it's their defensive coordinator they're going with, probably for next Monday against Buffalo.
I think if you'd have put Hackett as the interim head coach, I think that would have probably caused a revolt. To be fair, look, he comes across as a boring man. I'm not going to lie. You watch his press conferences and they are not entertaining. They are not. You don't get much from them. But yeah, just a bit. Look, I think if you'd have drawn up a list of coaches who are on the hot seat, at the start of the season after what happened the last year or the year before, you'd have probably put Salah on there, but he wouldn't have been on the hottest seat for me. He'd have probably been top 5, top 6. But I'm genuinely surprised to see him go before maybe Pedersen at the Jags, and I think the win for the Jags at the weekend probably saved Pedersen's job, to be perfectly honest. Much to the chagrin of one of our Jacksonville friends. But ultimately, the Jets, I'd say onwards and upwards. They're after Devontae Adams in a trade. Maybe that was one of the conditions of him actually joining the Jets was, I'm not going to play for Robert Saleh. You don't know, and we'll see how that unfolds over the next few days. But the Jets' offense is horrible. Vikings' defense is excellent. We know that from the last few weeks. But at the same time, they still had a chance to win against the Vikings and were, a questionable no call on the pass interference piece, or no pass interference piece, as I'm sure how Ollie saw it. But ultimately, yeah, well, just surprising. It just makes you think who's going to be next, to be honest.
That was kind of where I was going next with the conversation, Jim, is when who was actually favourite to go next. And I didn't know whether it might be Nick Sirianni at the Eagles. I didn't know whether it might be Brian Daboll at the Giants, but they seem to have, I don't want to use the phrase turned a corner, but they're progressively getting less shit. So that's good news. Was he the favourite to go at that stage, or are there other coaches that probably deserve the bullet before he deserved the bullet? Ollie?
Listen, with Salah, I mean, he's 20 wins, 36 losses across his 3.5 seasons. But he got dealt a tough hand. I mean, 56 games, and his quarterbacks, he had Zach Wilson for 31, Mike White for 7, Aaron Rodgers for 6, Joe Flacco for 5, Trevor Seaman for 3, and Tim Boyle for 2. But on the other hand, he didn't have a winning record in a single season. 4-13 in 2021, 7-10 in back-to-back seasons for 22 and 23. And then now they're currently on a losing record on the exact same points as they were last season, with 93 points scored and
I saw that.
a 2-3 record. So, but you've gone from Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers. So, no, I don't think it was. I think, like Jim said earlier, Doug Peterson probably, because not only did he lost the opening 4 games, but they lost the last 5 games of last season and bottled it. But for me, Nick Sirianni deserves to be on that hot seat. I think he's done a terrible job last season and the beginning of this season. Zach Taylor might be one, but that's kind of a tough one because it's been more the Bengals. Is he a more defensive head coach, Jim, Zach Taylor?
I believe so. Do you know what? I don't know. I think he might be an ex-defensive coordinator. I'm not 100% sure.
This is why I'm not sure, because the Bengals' defense has been atrocious, but on offense they've been performing pretty well and just not getting that win. Like we saw this week, 41-38, they lost to the Ravens. So there's a few on that list, but I don't think Salah would have been my top one guess. I don't think he would have been in my top 3 to go first, probably.
No, I mean, Pedersen was my number 1 to go first, to be honest. Like you said, lost the last 5, but bottled the playoffs last year. And then, horrible start to this season. They even lost to my Cleveland Browns, which tells you how bad they are, to be honest. So, yeah, Pedersen was definitely my number 1 to go. Salah was probably in my top 5. Sirianni's a great shout for that. The Eagles have regressed massively over the last 2 years. They started so well at the start of the last season and then again faded. Zach Taylor at the Bengals, I think losing that lead to the Ravens is probably not far from a sackable offence. If that was later in the season, I think he would probably struggle to come back from that, running the ball 3 times. When you're looking at a 53-yard, 54-yard field goal, was absolutely criminal, and he went completely within himself with a quarterback that had already thrown for 5 touchdowns and 360 yards or whatever it was. So putting the ball in Joe Burrow's hands to steal that victory would be a sackable offence. One name that we haven't discussed is Kevin Stefanski. Reigning coach of the year, 2 coach of the years in the last 4 years, but the Browns ownership have not shown historically a lot of patience with their head coaches and GMs, and I'd say this season's going about as wrong as you could possibly imagine for Kevin Stefanski. Deshaun Watson is abysmal. The offensive play calling is nothing better than abysmal. No run game. Penalties, ill discipline, everything. So I think if it wasn't for the fact he was reigning coach of the year, I think Stefanski will be in significantly more of an issue. Sorry about that. Might have to do that bit again.
You're going on holiday, aren't you? So is that your old man come to get your suitcase now?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, well, go and sort your suitcase out.
Give me 2 minutes and I'll be back.
Yeah, Ollie and I will carry on. You just come back whenever you're ready. Yeah, I mean, off he goes to give his suitcase to his old. I love it. It's genius. So, I mean, we've mentioned, I think, all 5. So CBS Sports do a sort of hot seat ranking, and they've got a top 5. Their number 1 was Doug Pedersen, same as us. Their number 2 is Brian Daboll at the Giants, and we haven't really had the opportunity to talk about that in any depth. I think the stat that I would give you about Daboll, his record is 17-21-1 with the Giants, so it's a losing record. Daniel Jones has not thrown a touchdown pass at MetLife Stadium since New Year's Day 2023 against the Colts. Now, I don't know whether that's on Daboll. I don't know whether that's on Daniel Jones. I don't know whether it's on a multitude of things. But unfortunately, it just doesn't reflect great on your head coach when your starting quarterback hasn't thrown a touchdown pass at your home stadium since New Year's Day, since the turn of the New Year's Day 2023. New Year's Day 2023.
What Daboll was good for and known for at Bills was stopping Josh Allen from mad interceptions constantly. And in that season, Daboll was there. He did stop, and it was probably his best year. So it's meant to be his effect on the quarterback, really, that's meant to be positive. But what you've just said there, not getting a touchdown pass at MetLife since New Year's Day 2023, is just not acceptable. But on the other hand, Daniel Jones is terrible. They've drafted Malik Neighbors, who is a stud, I think. I think he's an excellent player. And I think that it would be a reasonable shout, probably less of a risk to go, you know what, let's cut our ties with Daniel Jones at the end of the season. Let's keep Brian Daboll on board and let's draft a quarterback and let's see what he can do with that. If he has a horrible first season with the quarterback, then you reset and you get a new head coach. But I'm not sure. It doesn't surprise me that he's number 2, and it wouldn't surprise me if he does get fired. But I think there are, especially now you got, what are you, 2 and 3, the Giants?
Yeah.
2 and 3.
Yeah.
And you've lost to the Vikings, you lost to the Commanders, who are 5-0 and 4-1. And the Commanders game you only lost because you didn't have a kicker. I don't know who the other team you lost to was, but you've kind of pulled it back a little bit. So we'll have to see how that goes. He probably wouldn't be in my top 2 right now, because I don't think.
No, and it's the Giants are interesting whilst we're here because they've got progressively better. Obviously, the win against the Browns is, you've got to take that with a pinch of salt. But it was a really tight game against the Cowboys, and obviously that's a win in Seattle. That you can't knock it really. That and it's off the back of a really strong defensive performance. 7 sacks I think they came away with, the Giants' defense in Seattle. It's not bad going at all. I think you're probably right, Jim. Hold fire with Daboll maybe, even though CBS have got him second on their list.
Yeah, for me, Daboll's not the issue in New York. I think the roster's talent deficient. Pretty much, I think, Neighbors is the first real first-round pick that's hit early on in the last few years. And when you're burning through early round picks on players that aren't making an impact, that's how you get to where you are. I'm not saying, obviously there was Saquon Barkley last year and he went in the summer. But obviously we didn't see Saquon fit last year, really. The offensive line's been patchwork at best for 3 or 4 years. So for me, the issue is here is with the GM. And when you actually watch the Hard Knocks piece with them, his attitude and how he dealt with the Saquon sort of departure really kind of emphasised that he really thinks he's something when actually he's delivered very, very little. I think if you watch, anyone that watched Neighbors play in college last year could see that he was going to be a good wide receiver. He was mocked in the top 10 for probably about a year. So it's not a case of he stumbled across a really good player. Most people knew he was going to be a good player. So, but he just hasn't transformed that roster how it needed to be transformed. There's a massive lack of talent across the board. We've named Neighbors. How many what can you name their number 2 and 3? There's a question. Can you name their starting interior offensive line? Probably not. They haven't got a tight end. Daniel Jones is terrible, as Ollie so eloquently put it. But at the same time, he's eked out a couple of wins by being a game manager this year. So it is what it is. I don't think Dayball's the problem. I'd keep Dayball if I was the Giants owner, but the GM would be on his bike quickly, to be honest, and get someone in who can identify talent and work with Dayball to mould that offense the way Dayball's used to running an offense.
Just one more name to throw at you before we move on from the hot seat bit and which coaches are in potential trouble, and that is Matt Eberflus at the Bears. Again, he's on CBS's list. He's in CBS's top 5 as a coach that might be struggling in that situation. Survived Black Monday, didn't he? And then Caleb Williams is certainly not helping his case. I don't know what you two think about Eberflus.
I mean, Williams has been a lot better in the last 2 weeks, which I think has probably taken a lot of the heat off him. But they haven't been playing good teams, so they're beating up on bad teams. Chicago should be beating these teams. Eberflus has been a difficult one for him. He obviously had the Justin Fields thing. They bungled that and how they were dealt with that, and in terms of the return they got for him, and now he's thriving in Pittsburgh, so that's got a sting a little bit as well. But yeah, I think offensively the Bears have just been just bang average, to be honest. And I think with the amount of resources that they've got at skill positions, they should be better. But again, they haven't invested well in the offensive line over the last few years. You know, this year they went with Caleb and Rome Odunze at wide receiver when they already had a couple of wide receivers and there was still a couple of tackles left on the board. So I don't think they're doing their quarterbacks any favours, and Eberflus is not really changing his game plan to account for the fact that the quarterback's going to be under pressure a lot of the time. And this isn't college football, as Caleb Williams has found out through the first month of the season as he's been hammered. So, you know, I think Eberflus, I don't think he'll be... I think he'll probably last the season. I actually expect the Bears to probably get into you'd probably be there or thereabouts from the playoffs perspective. But yeah, it's not good. But the other one I've got is Antonio Pierce at the Raiders. He's scaring me at the moment because it's starting to smell like he's lost the locker room.
What's giving you that? Go on, Ollie.
First of all, the Davante Adams thing, him wanting to leave. They lost to the Broncos heavily. 38-17, but it was 38-10 for most of it, and then they got a touchdown in garbage time. It's just a feeling of, it's the same old Raiders again. And I think Jim may be right. I think he may have lost the locker room. And once you've lost that locker room, you've lost Davante Adams. You keep switching between your quarterbacks in game. He's been rotating Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. So there's been no consistency there at the quarterback spot, which is just something you can't do if they're not injured, in my opinion. Even if they're playing bad, he's bringing it, like he brought in Aiden O'Connell for Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell for a pick pretty much straight away, which Gardner didn't do in the game. I mean, it's just poor decisions. But I also...
Let's be honest, they've got nothing at quarterback. Minshew's a mid-level backup.
They should have gone for Justin Fields in the offseason or drafted or tried to move up aggressively for a quarterback, but they didn't. They made a mistake. Gardner Minshew is a great backup quarterback. But he's not a starter, and
why did you take a tight end 2 years in a row in the first round? Because they took Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer, didn't they, last year from a tight end?
And Brock Bowers is a stud. He's a great player, but it's not what they needed. And
you're crying out for a quarterback, and they let JJ McCarthy fall into your lap without even trying to get ahead. Bo Nix, who hasn't been the problem for the Broncos, and admittedly has been okay. They've let him fall into the Broncos' lap. They just
who are divisional rivals as well. But I've got one last head coach, and this may be a very controversial one, who I think could potentially end up on the hot seat or maybe get in there. Sean McDermott at the Bills, for me. The Bills, I think the Bills have underperformed massively. Some of the decisions they've made have been strange, especially in that Texans-Bills game. I mean, the game management was awful at the end by Sean McDermott. They were in their own end zone, and he threw 2 deep fades instead of just going for the first down and getting out of there. I mean, terrible choices. The Bills have been regressing in terms of playoffs. They were going from AFC Championship being level with the Chiefs to not really being of that standard. They're in a division with the Dolphins, the Patriots, and the Jets. The Patriots and Jets, who have been pretty woeful, and the Dolphins, who bottle the playoffs every time they get close to it, apart from once. So they've pretty much been guaranteed to win their division every time. And McDermott's decisions have been getting more questionable. Their passing game has regressed. Their running game was never particularly great, but now they're relying on Allen and James Cook to carry the entire offense. They've lost their last two games, I think, and it's starting to look worrying. I'm not saying he's on the hot seat now, but if things carry on how they are, with such a talented quarterback as well in Josh Allen, I could see him getting fired. I thought he may end up getting fired last season at
Are
the
they
end,
four
but
and one?
what?
Are they 4-1?
No.
I thought they were 4-1.
Pretty sure
Tips up. Ollie's finding out.
They got beat by the Ravens, didn't they?
They're 3-1, I think.
No, they got beaten by the Ravens and they lost to Houston yesterday.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so 3-2. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair shout on McDermott, to be fair. And it's one of those, once owners get a smell of success, if you don't live back up to that the following season or the season after that, or, the offense isn't as exciting as it was last year or the year before that, then owners start getting itchy trigger fingers. And I agree from that. I mean, it's interesting. I think we could probably take up the whole hour talking about coaches that, either are on the hot seat or could well be on the hot seat come the end of the season. I think Mike McDaniels at the Dolphins could be in trouble regardless of what happens with Tua. They've spent a lot of money on that defense and on the offense. You've always got your potential one and dones as well. Brian Callahan at the Titans, if they're as bad as what we're seeing at the moment. The Panthers going to make a change again, which, to be honest, they're terrible. And they couldn't get anything out of their first round pick from a year and a half ago.
Mike McCarthy.
Yeah, Mike McCarthy at the Cowboys could be in trouble. We've got half the league on notice on this podcast, to be honest with you. So I think it's a case of wait and see. If I asked you now who would be next to go, what do you reckon? What? Give me a name.
Doug Peterson. If they lose to Chicago in London, because London's been their playground. They win there. They won back-to-back games there last year. Their record would have looked a lot worse without that. If they lose to the Bears, who aren't great, let's be honest, like you said, they're beating average team, below average teams, in fact, beating up on them. If he loses that, I don't know if they fire him after that game because they're in London back to back. But if they lose both London games, he's gone. For me, Peterson's the next one. I think it was.
I've got a better one than that, and that is Nick Sirianni, because if things don't go his way next week against the Browns, there's no surviving that. There's no surviving it.
If you make Deshaun Watson look like a competent quarterback, then yeah, I agree with you. To be honest with you, if by some miracle he manages to throw for more than 200 yards and a touchdown against that Eagles defense, then Sirianni's got to go.
Is Chubb back yet? Like, could he be back for that game?
It's unlikely. We're expecting him back week 7, but he may be available. It's not guaranteed yet. But even if that's the case, I mean, Nick Chubb doesn't throw the ball, so he's not going to make Deshaun Watson look any better. Dirt balls, overthrows, throwing it straight to defenders, holding the ball for about 3.5 hours in the pocket is not ideal. So look, if the Eagles make the Browns look competent on Sunday, then yes, Sirianni should be fired.
What if, just to last point on this, what if the reverse in that game? I know you're expecting to lose, but if you get absolutely demolished by the Eagles, who've been very bad compared to their previous standards this season, does Stefanski get fired?
I don't think Stefanski gets fired yet. I think he'll be given till the end of the season to turn it around. Would he warrant being fired? Probably. But at the same time, there's a lot of problems with the Browns, specifically on offense. The defense is ill-disciplined as well at the moment. So it all reflects badly on the head coach. But ultimately, when your offensive line's gone from top 5 to bottom 3 in the space of 6 months, you've got no running game. You've got a quarterback that can't hit a barn door at 5 yards. Some of the blame's on the whole offensive staff. The offensive line coach must have been just sitting there having a cup of tea for training camp, because they look like they don't know what they're doing. The offensive coordinator has been brought in to play to Deshaun Watson's strengths, but yet doesn't call the plays, and that still sits with Stefanski. So there's honestly, it feels like they're still trying to figure it out, and it feels like I've watched the first preseason game 5 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I think, what is he, reigning and 2-time coach of the year, Stefanski? Is that right? And if he loses his job, he can write a nice thank you letter to Deshaun Watson, because the financial commitment that the Browns have made to Deshaun Watson will mean that whatever happens, he outlasts Stefanski. And if he keeps turning in performances like he's turned in at the beginning part of this season, the only reason that Stefanski goes is because Deshaun Watson says so. And that's...
I agree. I think when you look at it, though, with the way where the Browns are at the moment, I think we're picking about 3rd or 4th in the draft, if the draft was today. So we'd actually have a chance to get one of the top level quarterbacks who, whenever you've got a rookie quarterback, they're cheap. If we get a rookie quarterback that's cheap, you could see Deshaun Watson get cut with $130 million guaranteed left on his deal, which I think is a distinct possibility if Stefanski and Andrew Berry stay in situ at the Browns. If they don't, then they'll be making a change to try and get Deshaun Watson to work. I think when you're 3 years into an experiment, you can probably say it's not going to happen. But yeah, well, something drastic's got to change. I'd like to see Deshaun Watson cut, because if any other quarterback was playing this badly, he'd be cut. But that financial commitment is massive.
I hope you're enjoying this week's episode of Utter Punts. It's a pleasure to do it for you, as always. We'll get you right back to the conversation in just a moment. First up, a message from our sponsors. Here at Utter Punts, we love watching the NFL with friends, and in our opinion, there's no better place to grab a bite to eat and watch the NFL than Beer Keller in Manchester. The burgers are massive, there's loads of HD screens, the wings are great, and there's a superb choice of drinks behind the bar too. Most importantly for us though, the people are brilliant. Like-minded NFL fans who want to enjoy the game and have a laugh. It's definitely one of the best venues to watch your favourite team in. All right, let's shift it on, shall we? This would probably be a good time to start talking about what Ollie did at the weekend. Ollie, you went to London. You went to watch the NFL in London. Forget the game just for a second, but what was the experience like? What's it like when you get to go and watch a game in this country?
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, one point I want to make, it was at Tottenham Stadium, and I went to a game at Wembley 2 years ago, the Jags Broncos. It's so much better at Tottenham, genuine in terms of accessibility, getting out, getting in. It's so much quicker. I think at Wembley we waited about 2 hours after the game. It took about half an hour after the game at Tottenham, and we didn't even leave immediately. So the stadium's fantastic as well. Not in term. I'm not a fan of Spurs in terms of football, but their stadium is brilliant, absolutely great. The fans, it's great to see. I always play a game with my mates when I go to one of them to see if we could spot all 32 jerseys, and you do end up seeing it. We even said, I wonder if there's going to be a Mark Sanchez Jets jersey show up.
Always a Sanchez Jets jersey.
Yeah, and
it's almost novelty value. Like, you see it, and everyone just goes, ah, and wants to just put their arm around him. And
mate, there was some real sad jerseys.
To be fair, that's all you're looking for with Sanchez, but fumble conversation.
There were some real sad jerseys. There was a Marcus Mariota Titans jersey. There was a Josh Dobbs Vikings jersey.
Like been dashed in clothing form, like so.
There was a Daniel Jones in the new Giants kit. So there were some real terrible, sad jerseys, but we did spot every team. It was great, and the atmosphere was just, it felt like I was in America for 3 hours. You know what I mean? Like, it was an actual, real in America NFL game, and it did feel Vikings dominated in terms of the crowd. There were a lot more purple, you could just see it, than there was green, and it was classed as a home game, but obviously they don't do it like they give it to Vikings fans priority. It's just whoever gets it goes. But yeah, it was absolutely phenomenal. Really fun, really enjoyed it. Great experience. I would recommend it to anyone who hasn't gone before to a London game. Probably not the Bears Jags game, but maybe one next year. See who they play next year. We were actually discussing who might come next year, and there could be some good teams who haven't been in a while, like Detroit hasn't had an international game in 6 years. So yeah, definitely a brilliant experience, and obviously for me personally, the Vikings winning it topped it off.
And that was massive, right? They're one of two teams now in the league that are unbeaten this season, you and the Chiefs, and you've been pretty good value for it for the most part, apart from that very definite pass interference call that wasn't given at the end that would have made you lose the game. But I mean, other than that, Jim, it was decent, wasn't it?
Yeah, as much as I really want to, not the Vikings, I can't. Unfortunately, I was pleased that Birmingham City lost on the Saturday because at least I didn't have two like Cheshire cat grinning Vikings fans like, on my screen, and thankfully Dave's not here today, so that makes up for it. So Ollie can just wallow in that defeat on the one side of football, but unfortunately, when it gets to the Vikings. They're a really good side, especially defensively. I think they've probably got one of the top 2 or 3 defenses in the league, if not the best defense in the league. Flores, we've talked about him at length over the last, 3 or 4 podcasts. Fantastic defensive mind. Made a huge difference for the Vikings last year, and this year they spent some money and gave him the weapons he needed to play an attacking defense instead of a contain. So and I think that was evidenced by making Aaron Rodgers look. I read a tweet saying Aaron Rodgers looks like a 40-year-old man throwing a football, and that's exactly what Aaron Rodgers looked like for the vast majority of that game. The pick six, he just looked confused, and I think if you can confuse Aaron Rodgers, who's a cool customer usually, that's going some, and that gives you the upper hand immediately, especially with a Jets offense that isn't firing. Having said that. I'm not getting concerned, but I think Vikings fans should be getting concerned about them not putting teams away. They're putting up 20, 25 points in the first half, and then they're either taking their foot off the gas but the Jets didn't get a lot better. The Vikings just stopped playing as hard as they did in the first half to cut that out, and then it nearly cost them against Green Bay. It nearly cost them against the Jets. If you play a team like the Chiefs, you could well find yourself losing by 20 points if you're playing at half speed in the second half of the game. So I think there's a little bit where they need to focus in and put, whether it's the same effort or make some halftime adjustments to change it up a bit, because the last 2 weeks, it's got a bit hairy for Vikings fans, and I'm sure people were, I saw a picture of people biting their nails at the Tottenham ground at the weekend, so, and the dirty blue nose was one of them. So yeah, it's just one of those. I'm genuinely surprised. Sam Darnold looked human this week, I think is fair to say, but still played well by still a top 15 quarterback performance this week. But I think some of his past issues with overthrows, especially over the middle and in the middle of the pit, sort of beyond sort of 10 yards and stuff, we're coming to the fore a little bit, and we saw a little bit of a wobble. We saw a wobble last week. It's just a case of like something needs to get fixed, otherwise you could end up losing a 30-point lead, and that's got the potential for a big momentum shift during the season.
What's causing it, Ollie? What's causing the really, really strong for 3 quarters, 2 quarters, goes slightly sideways as we go towards the end? Is it complacency? Is it players thinking the job's done? Is it loads of effort going in early and nothing left in the tank to the end? What do you think the reason is for the Vikings struggling slightly in the later parts of the game?
Right, so we've got a bye week this week, and I think it's very much needed. I think getting through the Jets and Packers game were required. For me, it's a number of things. First of all, Darnold has taken some really heavy hits in the Jets early on in the Jets-Vikings game. He took a horrible hit to the hip, which he went into the tent for at Lambeau. He went off, and Nick Mullins came on for a play. So he's had a few little injuries that have been bothering him, which may have been affecting the way he's played in the second half. In terms of the Packers game, it was a special teams mistake. Our main returner, Brandon Powell, got a slight concussion, so Jalen Naylor got brought in, muffed the return, should have just left it. And in the end, we were 28-0 up, should have gone into half-time with that, and they ended up scoring a touchdown and got a bit of momentum. Part of it may also be Kevin O'Connell. He loves throwing the ball deep, and sometimes I don't think Sam Darnold has the capability to always do that consistently, especially when he's got these injuries. But for me, the Jets game in particular, there are a number of reasons. The weather was terrible, which may have also affected Rodgers, but the weather was awful. The turf in international games, we know the turf isn't great compared to in America. Aaron Jones getting injured early on in the game meant that instead of handing off the ball and getting 5 yards on your 5 yards on your first attempt, you're getting 1 or 2 with Ty Chandler, which means you're getting put into 2nd and 8, 3rd and 8, 3rd and 9 positions where it's a tougher ask. And then, and to be fair, I'm not going to, just because I love the players, I'm not going to say Justin Jefferson dropped a few balls he shouldn't have dropped. But there were also some passes that Darnold completely missed. So I think it's a case of we needed this bye week. It came at the right time. You're going in 5-0. You can't ask for much better. Jim is completely right in terms of there has been a worrying situation in the last 2 games. But it may also have been a case of them getting a bit complacent and just going, let's manage the game. Let's get the win. And we trust our defense. And the thing is, the defense has been ridiculous. Last season, in the whole season, we had 11 interceptions. 5 games in, we've got 11 interceptions, 3 of which were against the Jets, and 2 of them been returned for a pick 6 by Andrew Van Ginkel. So, yes, there are certain worries, but the coaches and the players haven't shied away from that. They've all said we need to improve on offense. That wasn't good enough, but we've got the win. And that's what I like, because the sign of a good team is, you know what, sometimes you don't play these pretty games. A lot of teams do it, like the Ravens, the Chiefs have played ugly games where they've won. And no one in the national media in America goes on about that because it's the Vikings and it's unexpected. People are going to talk about it more. But one last thing is, like, through 5 games, the Vikings have only trailed for 3 minutes and 26 seconds, which was against the Giants in the first game. The 3rd fewest by any team through 5 games since 2000. The other 2 were the 2009 Saints, who won the Super Bowl and did not trail till their 6th game. And the other one was the San Francisco 49ers last year, who trailed for 1 minute 45 and ended up losing in the Super Bowl. So they've been really impressive, but there are concerns there. Jim is right, but the bye weeks come at a perfect time now. I think it was much needed.
I haven't got anything to add to that. I think you're right.
I think that was, well done, Ollie. You've spoken so well that neither Jim or I have got anything else to say on the subject, so sod off, and hopefully you lose next week.
We got a bye, mate.
Week after next. At least you can't win next week. I think that's probably what I'm taking away from this. Look, there's just probably time for one more point of conversation before we call it a day. And we're going to get to that, shortly. Couple of other things just to let you know about. If you are in and around the Manchester area on Sunday the 13th, tickets are available to come and see Utter Punts live. We are doing a little show, just a small one, before we get started a little bit further down the track with the big ones as we get towards Thanksgiving and what have you. So if you want to come and watch a game with us, Sunday the 13th, it is the other, I think it's the other London game, isn't it, that's going on that day on the 13th. So we'll be at Beer Keller in Manchester if you'd like to come and say hello. The conversation continues on Utter Punts in just a moment, but to make sure that we can afford to keep putting these out, we have to, hand over to some adverts. We'll be back in a jiffy. If you're anything like us at Utter Punts, we love the fantasy games surrounding the NFL, but sometimes they're a bit too focused on their American audiences. That's why we were blown away when the Fantasy Game Day app rolled into town, a weekly fantasy game with player values in pounds totally dedicated to the NFL's UK audience. There's insights and analysis and plenty of opportunity to compete with your friends, but the best bit, weekly cash prizes. Use code PUNTS when you sign up for a free entry after you play your first week. Jayden Daniels is going to be the final thing to talk about before we call it a day. there is an awful lot of people saying that he is already offensive rookie of the year. He's already a -250 favourite at all of the sports betting sites in America. And, you know, the Washington Commanders have been a bit of a surprise package this season, Jim. Is it down to him or is it down to something else?
No, it's down to Jayden Daniels. He's the real deal. To be honest, I watched him against the Browns on Sunday. I've seen a few other little bits and pieces of him. Watched him in college last year for LSU, and to be honest with you, yeah, he's got he's got the awareness level for a rookie quarterback is unbelievable. I don't think Myles Garrett actually got on the stat sheet against the Commanders, which is an indictment of the Browns' defense, but also how well that Jayden Daniels runs that offense. He threw an interception on the goal line against the Browns. We ended up punting, surprise, surprise, and the next drive, within 6 plays, he was back. He was in the end zone, and I think it's the bounce back ability. It's the fact that he's having the offense simplified for him by his offensive coordinator, and our defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz recognised that and took away his first read on a lot of things, but he was finding his second and third read without a problem, and that's usually where you get into trouble with a rookie quarterback, is when their primary option isn't open, and that's obviously Terry McLaurin for the Commanders. He still put up a few catches and some yards and whatever else, but ultimately he was spraying it around. He's got the wheels on him are real. I think he ran for about 85 yards against the Browns, including some absolute daggers on third down where he was running for, I think he ran for a 30-yard gain, a 50-yard gain and stuff like that. Frustrating to watch, frustrating for a defense to be part of. I don't think they've played some of the higher level competition yet, to be honest. I think the Browns definitely are not in that piece. So I think if you put him against maybe the Vikings defense, that would be a really interesting matchup as something to see, because the Vikings would be putting pressure on him up front, and he'd be relying on that back end that we've talked about with the Vikings is probably the weak link in the defense. It just doesn't get there very often. So I think the proof will be in the pudding when he plays against a good all-around defense and good all-around team that's not in disarray. But he's done what he can do. He had an 82% completion percentage going into Sunday. I think he had 62 or 63 against the Browns, so overall he's still above 75. He's got a number of records. He reminded me very much of RG3 watching him on Sunday. And I hope that the Commanders have got enough in their offensive line to keep him upright and to keep him with both legs attached, because obviously that's what happened with RG3, and I don't want that to happen to Daniels. But if you compare Daniels to Caleb Williams, there's no comparison for how they've settled and how they're dealing. And when you look at Williams' offensive options, they're much, much better than the Jayden Daniels is across the board. But Daniels is spreading that ball around and he's lifting players up and making them look better.
I'm going to come to you in a second, Ollie. Hold that thought. Don't go anywhere. They've got the Ravens next up, Washington. But once they get out the other side of that, week 7, they've got Carolina. Week 8, they've got Chicago. Week 9, they've got the Giants. Week 10, they've got Pittsburgh. So they've got a run after the Ravens of these incredibly winnable fixtures. And what I guess what I'm trying to say is his stock is already sky high. Imagine what his stock could be like by the time he gets to week 10, Ollie.
Yeah, I mean, so the Commanders actually have the highest average point scoring in the NFL at the minute. 31 points per game is the average. I think he's been phenomenal. For a rookie, even in his first game, which they lost to the Bucks 37-20, he rushed in 2 touchdowns himself, and I thought, you know what, he's got potential, but we got to see his pass game improve, and it has. Jim's right in terms of the Commanders have played they've played the Giants, the Bengals, the Cardinals, and the Browns. The Cardinals beat the Niners this week, and they absolutely demolished them 42-14, the Commanders did. And the Bengals still have Joe Burrow. He went toe-to-toe with one of the best QBs and ended up coming out on the winning side. But yeah, it's a very winnable remaining schedule. I think it does help that their division, the NFC East, has been very underwhelming. Every team, I mean, the Cowboys and Eagles haven't been up to their usual standards, and the Giants are the Giants at the end. In fact, the Giants have actually been above the standard we'd probably expected, but still, that's not going to be better than Washington. And then they've got a couple games sprinkled in there, like the Titans, the Saints, Falcons. I think they're all winnable games. I think, if he gets to playoffs with them, which I think it's a really good chance now. They've gone 4-1. It doesn't get much better for a rookie season, considering how much turmoil the Commanders have been in the last few years. I mean, they've been really awful, which is why they had the second overall pick to get him. I think he's brilliant. He's really exciting. The only thing I worry about, a bit like Jim, is he's not built, which does help with his running, but it means when he's taking those big hits, and he hasn't come up against a team that's going to give him that yet, it could be worrying with his frame. And he doesn't slide. He goes in to get those extra yards. But like I said, I don't want something like what happened to RG3 to happen to him, because he is a brilliant talent.
Jim, does this make next week really interesting? You've got a quarterback that is quite similar in a lot of ways to the Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson, and they're taking on one another. One of those quarterbacks has found out the hard way that actually sliding is probably not a terrible idea. Getting your shoulder down and taking those hits is probably a bad idea. And another one that is still fresh to the league that's quite willing to go running into trouble.
And yeah, look, the Ravens defense is a completely different proposition to what he's faced so far in his NFL career. They're bigger, they're faster. They've got a safety. They've got a middle linebacker that can track the quarterback with the Ravens. A big shout out to Washington's defense, to be fair as well. Washington's defense has put Daniels in position to succeed. When you're playing with a shorter field, it makes players look better. And Daniels has taken advantage of that. So the Washington defense is not to be sniffed at, I think is a fair statement to make. But the Ravens piece is a completely different kettle of fish. I think it's going, like you say, it'll be really interesting. I think Daniels is possibly a better runner than Lamar, which is saying something. He's got a longer stride and he looks a little bit more natural. I think Lamar's he's obviously a better all-around quarterback. He's an ex-NFL MVP and stuff like that. So there's not a comparison there to make yet. But from what we're seeing from Daniels at the moment, if he continues on that trajectory, yes. And I think if they beat the Ravens next week, which, look, I don't think is out of the question. The Commanders' defense is a lot better than the Bengals' defense. And obviously we saw what happened at the weekend with it being such a high-scoring game. If Daniels continues to perform at the level that he has done since week one, then yeah, I think the Commanders, they'll be going in as probably slight underdogs, but I could see them, quite easily coming away from that with a win. And then, like you've called out from the rest of their schedule, their next 4 or 5 games are very, very winnable. They could be sitting at 8-2 after 10 weeks with a rookie quarterback, and the situation that they were in last season would be a minor miracle. And there was a stat on Sunday that they've got 31 new players on their roster this year compared to last year. So obviously that's a 60% roster turnover in a year, and that was all about changing the culture. And I think when you look at it, Jayden Daniels has been a big part of changing that culture. Winning is a huge part of changing that culture too. Both of those pieces have come together, and as a result of that, the Commanders are not to be sniffed at the moment for sure. But it'll be very interesting and if we were clever enough with the old tech, looking at some side by sides of Lamar and Daniels on runs or simple dropbacks and stuff would be quite interesting to see, because in my opinion you'd probably see some significant similarities.
Well, I'll try and do that for next week. I'm not promising anything, but I'll give it a bash once I'm back from Munich at the weekend. Right, gentlemen, I think we've probably
sort of meandered. I want to do one other thing just before we go.
Go on.
Just because Dave's not here.
Please.
Let's give Kirk Cousins his flowers.
Yeah. do it.
506 yards in prime time. So this is Dave who says Kirk can't play in prime time. Kirk can't deliver on the big stage. Kirk's only got one leg. You know, all of that stuff. Pulled it out the bag for the Falcons against the Buccaneers in overtime. Absolutely wiped the floor with them. 506 yards after last week we discussed how people were not throwing for more than about 220. Kirk Cousins, I salute you. Big fan, sir. And just if nothing else, just to annoy Dave.
I want to mention one thing as well, not related to Kirk. I find that hilarious. Wind up, Dave. But just cycling back to the start of the episode, and probably what the title is going to be around the Jets and Saleh being fired. I just wanted to pose a question. You don't have to answer it now. You can if you want. Could we see potentially Bill Belichick come and become the permanent head coach of the New York Jets? They've got a great defense, which is his strong suit. They've got a Hall of Fame quarterback. Maybe he hasn't performed to that standard. Could that potentially happen, or do they just ride out the season with an interim?
I hope it does. I think it'll be great banter for the rest of the season. Aaron Rodgers and Bill Belichick in a huddle would be something I'd be very interested to see. To be honest, I hope they do the in-season hard knocks on the Jets if that was the case, because Bill Belichick is hilarious. He's the deadest, driest man alive, but he is hilarious. So yeah, and I'll always remember that draft where his dog was just sitting in his seat and they went live to Bill Belichick and it's just his dog sat in his seat, and for that reason Bill Belichick is a legend. Obviously he's won some things too, but it would be interesting to see for sure.
He's a former Jets coach as well. He is. Before. Yeah.
I mean, if you bought him in I think it's probably got to go quite badly for the interim coach. So if they get stuffed this week and the week after, then yes, I think you probably are going into that battle, because you're not going to get an up and coming, but you can't recruit a coordinator mid-season. So you'd be looking at someone who hasn't got a job at the moment, and you know, when you look at the list, Bill Belichick should be and is at the top of that list. So I don't think it will be imminent. I think 2 or 3 weeks down the line, could it happen? Quite possibly, yes.
The Jags and the Jets to race for Bill Belichick.
Loser gets Urban Meyer. And all of his bells and whistles and cheerleaders and girls in tight small skirts at bars and things like that.
What's his relationship like with Nathaniel Hackett, Aaron Rodgers?
Strong. That's the reason he's not gone.
Yeah, don't they go to like the cabin allegedly and drink mushroom tea together?
Probably.
But he was the one who got Hackett hired for the Jets. He was the one who got Hackett hired as the Broncos head coach, effectively. It'd be interesting if Aaron Rodgers continues on his current, level of where he's going, whether that friendship maintains and stands the test of that, because I think Aaron Rodgers could be looking for someone to blame if this Jets thing doesn't necessarily work out. But they're bosom buddies from what we understand.
I wonder whether there might be a head coaching job in Nathaniel Hackett's future. We shall wait and see. There's the only thing that will tell us is time. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Ollie, thank you very much.
Thank you. See you next
Jim,
week.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your holiday, pal.
Thank you very much, guys.
All right, we will see you next time on Utter Punts.